to do the programming, since we've had these machines, would have been over $23,000. So we've really saved the county, and we're going to continue to save. But Mr. Chairman, I just appreciate if you could take a look at that and add the reduction back to the budget so we can proceed for the year.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd.
I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Garrett is next, followed by Ms. Olson, and then followed by Mr. Bill Botts.
Good evening. I'm Pam Garrett. I'm the Executive Director from the Safe Harbor Child Advocacy Center, and I'm here tonight to request that you reconsider and add us to your budget. We have requested $5,000 for help with our center, and I wanted to explain why, but first let me give you something to think about before I move on. 1 in 4 little girls is sexually abused before age 18, and 1 in 7 little boys is sexually abused before he is 18. And these are the children that tell us about it. Child abuse is extremely complex, and when these children come forward and they tell somebody that something's happened to them, the investigative process is so traumatizing in the fact that they tell the person, that person takes them to another person, police get involved, the child has to tell the police officer their story, sometimes nurses their story, CPS their story, and by the time a child has told their story, they've talked to at least 15 people. Safe Harbor came along, and we opened May 1st of 2009, and we exist to strengthen the community response to situations of child abuse involving sexual abuse, severe physical abuse, and neglect, as well as to help those children who witness violence. We have a memorandum of understanding with the Caroline County Sheriff's Department, the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, the victim witness, and we also work with Mary Washington Hospital. They provide us all their forensic nurses to come on site to do forensic exams of children that are abused. And we are working very closely now with the RACSB, who provides us a therapist for all our case review for any cases that are very tough. So it's a very collaborated event. If you were to come visit us, it's a very child-friendly facility. The child walks in and they don't even realize that there are probably 6 to 7 people in the room opposite, and they come in, they have a playroom, they talk with one person, and they get to tell their story to that person while the team that is investigating the abuse is listening and asking through an earpiece their questions so that that child doesn't have to talk with all of them. I'm encouraging you to support us in that. When we opened in 2009, May 1st, we have served 204 children. 70 of those children, as of today, came from Caroline County. In 2010, 134 children came to Safe Harbor. 48 of them were from Caroline County. This year already, we have served 8 children from Caroline County. Just in the last 7 days, I've had 5 of them come through. As a result of the coordinated response in 2010, 20 of the cases from Caroline County were accepted for prosecution. 14 of them have led to either a conviction or a plea. 7 of those children received a medical exam on site. Last week, 3 of them received medical exams. We have been working with many of these families to find mental health services and provide case management for them. We have one child that we will be keeping on our docket until she's safe out of residential treatment and we know she's okay and can go home to a safe environment. We work with probation and we're working with her guardian ad litem, and we are committed to making sure with the work of the Sheriff's Department and the prosecutor that she doesn't go home to an unsafe environment. We also provide training funds that have allowed Caroline detectives, the victim witness, and prosecutors to attend many trainings. These trainings have involved how to forensically interview a child. They've been about child abuse, how to handle child abuse. One of the detectives is definitely dedicated to help him. What I'm asking you is to remember this: the first child they brought to Safe Harbor, She told her story. She had an exam, walked out the door, said that was fun with her mom because she was so relaxed, and her perpetrator confessed as soon as he was confronted with the evidence. And I asked Major Mosier to speak.
Yeah, we currently have a full-time investigator that deals with sexual assaults against children. Sheriff Liff is very committed to this program. We did not budget for this. It usually comes out of the county's budget, just to let you know that we certainly are committed. We did apply for a grant for this very program, as well as domestic violence, and we have a full-time employee that just does this. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Major Mosier. Ms. Olson, Mr. Botts, and then Jim Schaefer.
Sorry, I'm a bit shorter. My name is Carol Olson. I'm the Executive Director of the Rappahannock Council Against Sexual Assault. We have been serving Caroline County for over 20 years. For the last couple of years, you have cut our funding, and we are asking to be restored to the budget, as our cases from your county have increased over those 2 years. While we traditionally served about 6% of our caseload from Caroline County, it has risen to 10 and is increasing. We have already exceeded this year the cases we saw last year. We serve over 1,000 people a year on our 24-hour hotline, crisis services. We are open 24 hours a day. We serve over 450 cases coming in for direct services. Once again, over 10% of those cases are from Caroline County. We serve children, youth, and adults. It costs, on average, we've been providing about $60,000 worth of services to Caroline County. The cost for providing crisis services, accompaniment to forensic exams, follow-up care, legal advocacy, that's attention throughout the court process. It costs on average around $600 per person. We do trauma-informed counseling for victims as well as for their non-offending parents and loved ones. And that runs on average $1,200 or more a person. An example on some high-profile cases you've had, we provided the legal advocate that stayed in court for 2 days with the family, the victim, and personnel to provide support on site during that process. We are getting increasing requests to provide our services directly in Caroline County, and we have great response from our partners in legal services and victim witness to have some free space available. It still costs me for people to drive down there and spend time. You're 30 minutes away from our office. We would love to expand our services. However, the little bit of funding we got for rural counties is ending because Caroline County is losing its rural status. You're not considered a rural county anymore because obviously you're growing. And so those funds will end. And we really need to keep providing services. The request, as you grow, obviously crime increases. And the wonderful efforts of your identified police officer for sexual assault and domestic violence services and the great job you're doing actually means more people report. And they're requesting more services. We also provide prevention education. We provide programs on choose respect and safe dates in the schools. We're getting some requests. We'd love to be able to come and do it. We do training for law enforcement on how to respond to sexual assault victims. And by the way, we do internet safety for when you get that broadband going in the county. So please consider restoring us. We're only asking for like $6,400 to try to keep it going. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Mr. Bott?
Sorry.
Mr. Schaefer, and then, I'm sorry.
Would just reiterate that it's a team effort between the agencies. We all have memorandums of understanding, and I'm here to support them on behalf of Sheriff Lippa. Thank you.
Thank you, Major Mosier. Mr. Botts, Jim Schaefer, and then Bonnie Cannon.
Good evening, Chairman Thomas and members of the board. My name is Bill Botts. Our legal aid program has been serving the county since 1973. We've been funded by the county since 1989. I'm here to request that our current funding of $1,500 be increased to $3,000. Beginning 3 years ago, counties, cities, towns, nonprofits began tightening their belts. Funding by counties, cities, and towns to Rappahannock Legal Services has been cut by 20% on average over the last 3 years. It's been cut by 78% in Caroline. Caroline's number of clients served is 8th among 19 jurisdictions served by Rappahannock Legal Services. Its funding level is 17th out of 19. Last year we served 125 families. We achieved benefits of $229,000, money in the pockets of those households. That includes child support, disability benefits, and an increasing amount of unemployment benefits. In fact, $125,000 in unemployment benefits, people who've been denied unfairly, and we had hearings. It's for 15 families that otherwise would have had no income in their households. Non-monetary benefits included 20 spousal protective orders, and 25 preventions of either evictions or foreclosures. We're doing a lot of work now in loan modifications and have avoided a lot of foreclosures, including in Caroline, for that reason. Last October, we had a marathon session of our board of directors, and we looked at some very frightening budgetary information. And we saw that we had to come up with a plan that would include presentation of funding requests to local governments. I'm retiring next month. I've been in legal services in 3 states since 1973, about 38 years of service. During 35 of those years, I was in a payroll deduction plan. I was very fortunate to save money, and I told the board last October that I would take $100,000 out of my personal savings and donate it to the program. I indicated to them if I did not, the Fredericksburg office stood to lose. They'd already lost one of its 3 attorneys, would lose another one, and perhaps part or all of another one because of the funding picture. The board accepted that and then challenged the local bar, the 500 attorneys in our program service area, to donate a matching $100,000 over the next 18 months. And part of my job in retirement is to convince my colleagues to do that. The board also approved a request to have a 5% increase in general local government funding, but in the case of Caroline, to ask for an increase from $1,500 to $3,000, which would put us at, I believe, about 43% of our FY 2008 level. For all of these reasons and the further reasons stated in my email to you last Friday, I request that you consider the $3,000, and we do thank you for the support since 1989. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Botts. Jim Schaefer?
My name's Jim Schaefer. I'm the Executive Director of the Rappahannock Area Agency on Aging. And before I begin, I'd like to welcome Mr. Underwood to our Board of Directors. Our meeting for March is next Wednesday, if you can make it. I hope it proves to be a rewarding experience for you. I'd also like to thank you for reappointing Mr. Roselle to our board, who has served with us for 10 years and has really been an asset to the Board of Directors. And also like to thank Mr. Ashcraft for his ongoing support of agency operations. Very supportive from the very beginning of your tenure, so we do thank you for that. And I want to thank the entire Caroline County Board of Supervisors for your many years of support for the RAAA and its programs in the county. As you may be aware, we are one of 25 area agencies on aging serving the needs of a growing elderly population in Virginia, and are in our 35th year of providing a wide array of assistance to the residents of Caroline County and Planning District 16. It's the mission of the RAAA and the nationwide aging network, of which we are a part, to help older persons, especially those who are low income and socially disadvantaged, to maintain a healthy and independent lifestyle so that they may remain active and engaged members of the community. It is far more cost-effective to provide in-home community-based services than to pay for very expensive nursing home care or no care at all if the programs of the RAAA were not available. Demand for our services remains strong in Caroline County and throughout the planning district. In fiscal year 10, we provided 4,729 congregate meals here at the Community Services Center and at the Madison Ruritan Club in Ladysmith. Caroline is currently the only county where we operate 2 meal centers. We served 11,197 meals to our homebound seniors in Caroline County through our Meals on Wheels program. Our Homemaker program provided 240 hours of service to Caroline residents, and our weatherization and home repair programs assisted 36 people. Our transportation program provided 5,908 trips to meal centers, grocery stores, banks, pharmacies, medical appointments, and socialization and recreational outings, including the annual Rotary Club Christmas Gala. The RAAA now operates an expanded grant-funded transportation program called Mobility Options that provides rides for elderly and people of any age with a disability throughout the planning district. This service began as a smaller grant-funded partnership between the RAAA and the Caroline County Rotary Club, but now encompasses collaborations with numerous other organizations and agencies, including for-profit transportation providers like Wisdom Rides, which is headquartered here in Caroline County. These are just a few of the services offered by the RAAA. In FY10, we provided help for over 400 county residents with services valued at $269,192. And as always, local government support is vitally important for our operations. The RAAA funding request this year is for $20,000, which will be used in our meals program and transportation activity in Caroline. I believe this is a good investment for the older population of the county, and I hope you agree. And so, again, thank you very much for your past support.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Bonnie Cannon?
Good evening. My name's Bonnie Cannon. I'm from the Bowling Green District. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I come before you tonight to request that you reduce, and I repeat, reduce county spending. As you know, many citizens of the county are retirees and live on a fixed income, of which I am now a recent retiree in this group. Besides, in this economy today, I don't believe there is anyone that is not trying to pinch their income dollars. So I again ask you to think of citizens, especially this retiree group and other county citizens included, when you approve the upcoming county spending plan for the 2011-12 tax year, and with no tax increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon. Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding the proposed budget? Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding the proposed budget? Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding the proposed budget? Hearing none, we'll declare that public hearing to be closed. Our next public hearing will be the proposed tax rate for fiscal year 2011-2012. I have 3 people who signed up. The first would be George Parker. The second would be Bob Popowitz Sr., and the third would be Keith Brady. Mr. Parker.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I have read the budget proposal.
Mr. Parker, I know, but just for the record, you have to state your name and your voting district.
Yes, sir. George Parker, Mattapanai voting district. I have read the proposed budget, and quite frankly, I have long been alarmed by the amount of debt the county is carrying. With no disrespect intended, I believe the board is spending the county into oblivion, and frankly, I wonder if we can ever repay the debt that we're carrying now. If I were sitting in your seat, I know I would be extremely unpopular because I have an awful lot of red X's that I wrote in here as I reviewed the budget. I see that in my view, there are many areas to cut, and I believe that we cannot continue this downward trend of spending, spending, spending. Therefore, I respectfully request and urge that each of you carefully review the budget and consider making these difficult and ugly slashes to the budget before you consider implementing a more than 40% increase in our property tax rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Popowitz? The Mr. Popowitz.
Bob Popowitz Sr., Fort Royal District. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm here to speak about our tax equalization, so I'm going to go right to the point. In our district, tax equalization and your proposed tax increase means a double tax for many of my neighbors, including myself. I guess you guys are aware of what's going on in this county and in this country today. If you've been to the gas pump, grocery store, and how about a 9% unemployment rate in our county? People are living on the edge. I know there's a lot of requests and there's probably a lot of good things that need to be done. But I think it's time for this board to look at this budget and look at these tax increases. We elected you guys to be problem solvers. We didn't elect you to be tax and spend, because we didn't need you if you're going to do that. I want to address the school budget. I know this is about our tax increase, but that's going to affect it.
We're giving you that leeway, Mr. Popowitz.
Okay. I watched Mr. Keogh's presentation. It was quite impressive. It kind of reminded me of the prospectus I get in the mail from my stocks. A lot of facts and figures and no real insight. I want to address the teachers. They say they're not making enough money. Well, you know, they work 180 days a year, they make a good salary, and they have an option. If they don't like it, they can go someplace else. The people and the taxpayers or the unemployed in this county can't do that. Me as a taxpayer, I can't do it. I've got to pay the bill. Looking at those line items, I think if we eliminated the top three, which are big pay increases for administrators, teachers, and waste like that, I think you guys can balance your budget. And one more thing I want to address. I think that the people of this county are not aware of this proposed $52 million bond referendum. We got to pay for it. And I think that that's ridiculous. And I'll tell you what I also think. I think it's a ploy by two members on this board to get votes in this upcoming election. You guys have done a great job in trying to bring in businesses, because that's the way we're going to work our way out of this mess. I think I got to commend you for that. You're on the right track. But I was really disheartened when one of these members voted against not increasing the capacity in our wastewater treatment plant. How are we going to bring in businesses without it? And how are we going to, you guys are coming back to me as a taxpayer. Well, I heard talks about wells. Well, this well's going dry, along with a whole bunch of us. So I would hope that you guys will take a good hard look at this budget. I don't want to cut fire and rescue or police, because they protect us every day of our lives, all citizens, and they put their lives on the line. Everybody else, look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Popowitz. Keith Brady?
I'm Keith Brady. I live in the Reedy Church District. I guess I'm going to be the oddball here. As far as the proposed tax rates, I'm actually in support of it for one simple reason: our schools. I'm a parent of 3 kids. I have a kid that goes to high school, a kid goes to middle school, and a son that goes to Madison. And if any of you, and I know you've had plenty of people up here before you, our schools are in dire need of help. And if anybody doesn't understand that or doesn't realize that, I don't know what to say. That should be our biggest investment that we have. In my opinion, we are not doing a very good job at all. That's the simple reason right there. And I understand, you know, it's not popular. Raising taxes is never popular. It's never been popular. But it's time to pay the piper. And our schools desperately need help. And as a voter and a taxpayer, I have no problem with paying more, especially if it goes to schools. Because our schools need help. And as far as economic development and all that, if we invest in our schools, we will attract business. It's a simple thing. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding the tax rate? Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding the tax rate? Is there anyone else who would like to speak regarding the tax rate? Hearing none, we will declare that public hearing to be closed. And we thank all those who came out to speak regarding the budget and the tax rate and to give us your opinions. We appreciate those and we'll factor those into our decision making. Agenda item number 7 is discussion of bailing out of the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I believe that's the registrar. Do we want to say anything?
Can I use the PowerPoint or?
You have a PowerPoint? You do?
I do. It's on the web. It's on the desktop here.
At 10 o'clock, you want us to cut the lights off?
Would you rather do it without the PowerPoint, or would you? If we can do it with the PowerPoint, it might go quicker.
Up to you.
Okay.
Mr. Underwood?
Just double click this. Let's go over here with the mouse. Okay. I'd like to introduce Attorney Gerald Hebert. He's an attorney in a private practice in Alexandria, Virginia. He served for over 20 years as an attorney in the Department of Justice, where he enforced provisions of the Voting Rights Act. He has represented numerous state and local governments on redistricting and bailout matters. He has represented all of the Virginia counties and cities that have bailed out. And this is Attorney Hebert. And I think this is the...
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. As was indicated, I spent a little over 20 years enforcing the Voting Rights Act at the Justice Department, and I'd like to spend a couple of minutes right now explaining what a bailout is. It's a terrible word these days with these economic times, but that's what it's called. So the question is, what is exactly a bailout? There's a lot of misinformation about what it is. Well, what it is that state and local governments that are subject to certain special provisions of the Voting Rights Act, including preclearance, can terminate coverage under those special provisions by seeking an exemption from the preclearance requirements. The preclearance requirements only apply in 16 states, the ones in red and then the one in counties in blue. The way that was originally determined in 1965 was that the Congress passed a law that said if any state has a test or device, literacy test, poll tax, things like that, as a prerequisite to registering to vote, and less than 50% of the voting age population in the state was registered, then you would be subject to these special provisions of the Act. The formula that I just described was targeted to the Deep South because in those states that had primarily a substantial African-American population. Most of the African-American voters were not voters. They were not being able to be registered because of discrimination, a long history of discrimination. And so consequently, the voting age population the registered voter population didn't include blacks, and so they fell below that 50% threshold. Now, to get pre-clearance, as you probably know, every time you make a voting change, any change at all, if you move a polling place, or if you change a precinct boundary, or if you do a redistricting plan, you have to send it into the Justice Department for approval. You could also go to the D.C. court if you wanted, federal court. You have your option, but 99.9% of everybody goes to DOJ. And you have to show that whatever voting change you're doing is free of a racially discriminatory purpose, and it's free of a racially discriminatory effect. You have the burden as the county government to establish that with regard to each and every change. Now, what do you have to do to get a bailout? Well, you have to show that over the last 10 years, you haven't used any test or device to determine whether somebody is eligible to vote, like a literacy test or good character reference or something like that. You have to show that no federal voting registrars, called federal examiners, were sent to Caroline County. You have to show that you've submitted all of your voting changes to the Justice Department for approval in a timely way, and you have to also prove that the Justice Department hasn't turned you down. In addition, you must also show these 4 things at the time you're seeking a bailout. You have to show that if you have any election systems for the county that dilute black voting strength, that you've eliminated them. For example, if you elected your county at large instead of from 5 single-member districts, and black voters continued to vote for black candidates, but because they were in the minority, they were outvoted by whites who wouldn't vote for black candidates, that would be a dilutive at-large election system. You don't have that here. In fact, you have 2 African Americans on the county board now in a county that is roughly 23% African American. Is that right?
The census said, I think 29.
29. It was 23 in 2000. It's now up to 29. If you've had any harassment or...
Kind of touch base on that? Mr. Underwood is replacing Mr. Roselle, and I don't know if you were here when Mr. Roselle was here.
I was not here, no.
Okay. So just for this past 8 months or whatever, those numbers are true, but they weren't true for the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. If you've had any harassment or intimidation of voters, you've taken steps to eliminate it. For the most part, we haven't seen a lot of harassment and intimidation of voters on account of race or color. We've seen it for other reasons in some parts of the United States, unfortunately. But if you have it, you have to show that you've dealt with it in a constructive way. I'm not familiar with any, the registrar is certainly not familiar with any harassment or intimidation of voters. You have to show that you've also expanded the opportunities for convenient registration and to vote. And you have polling places that are conveniently located. You have an opportunity to register to vote in numerous ways. And I think it's fair to say that opportunities here to register and vote have been expanded over the years. You also have to show that minority people are playing a role in the political process here in Caroline County, whether they are elected officials, or whether they're on the electoral board, or whether they work as poll officials, or whether they've ever been elected to county office, and so on. Now, to prove all those things, you just gather data. You gather population data, voter registration data, turnout data, election data. You take that data and you look, has it changed? How has it improved over time? The registration, we heard earlier tonight that the voter registration numbers here increased by 50% over the decade, which is even higher than the voting age population increased. That shows that you are offering greater opportunities for people to become registered. And you have to look at, whether you've switched. Did you recently switch from single-member districts to at-large or something like that? You have to show how have my minority candidates when they've run, and by minorities I'm talking about primarily African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans. How have they fared when they've run for office? Have they faced any opposition? Are there neighborhoods they can't go in? Some communities, sadly, that's the case. And you have pre-clearance history. You have to get some DOJ records. County's already done that. You get their own county records. You've already done that. The registrar has most of this information at her fingertips. You have to look at the how many people have worked in the voter registration office, or have any blacks served on the electoral board? Have blacks been able to serve as poll officials? Now in 2009, and this is, I know, a lot of text to put on a screen, but the Voting Rights Act hung on by a thread in the Supreme Court of the United States in 2009. It was felt that there were 4 votes on the U.S. Supreme Court to hold the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional, the preclearance provisions. And there were 4 votes to not hold it unconstitutional, to keep it constitutional. And then there was a 5th vote, Justice Kennedy, who could have gone either way, and we never really know, well, we don't know yet where he'll fall. But they instead said that, well, 8 justices said, well, we're going to express a real doubt about the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to allow anybody to bail out, whether they're a county government or a town or a municipal utility district in Texas, which is what this case was, NMUDNO. It was a NMUDNO decision, and that stands for Northwest Austin Municipal Utility District Number 1. That little municipal utility district decided they wanted to bail out, and they were allowed to, and the Supreme Court expressed grave doubt about whether this preclearance provisions were really needed. In the words of Chief Justice John Roberts, you know, times have changed. You know, the South has changed. Many places have changed for the better, and people ought to be able to get out from under these preclearance requirements that often carry a stigma. Now, what are the advantages of getting a bailout? Well, first of all, it's a chance, as I say, to eliminate the stigma that's associated with having to obtain federal approval each and every time you make a voting change, no matter how minor. You relocated the voter registration office. You had to go to the Justice Department to get approval. You relocated it again. You had to get approval again. You had to get approval 20 times in the last decade. It's less costly to get a bailout than it is to continue to make Section 5 preclearance submissions. We've had a lot of talk tonight at your public hearings here about trying to save money. A bailout will save your county money. Over the next 25 years, it'll save you thousands of dollars. It's an investment now of less than probably $4,000 to get a bailout, and it'll be for all time. It gives you more flexibility. It'll give the registrar and the electoral board flexibility to make routine election changes without having to wait for preclearance. I had a registrar tell me that a black preacher came to him on a Wednesday and said, hey, I'm having a church picnic. Can you come out to my church and register voters on Sunday? And he said, no, I can't, because I have to get preclearance approval, and that takes 60 days from the Justice Department. Why are we letting the Voting Rights Act prevent us from providing the opportunities to the beneficiaries of the Voting Rights Act? A bailout eliminates that. Now, why local government should seek a bailout before redistricting? Well, it's pretty obvious. This year, you're going to implement probably half a dozen changes. You're going to change precincts. You're going to have to create new precincts, adjust boundaries for your districts, for your members of the Board of Supervisors, and it'll give you really a chance to save some money immediately this year by not having to go through the preclearance process, but you also have to build in that timetable of wait of about 60 days in order to get preclearance. Now, the man who spoke earlier at your public hearing about bailout said that, you know, he was concerned. He expressed 2 very legitimate concerns about a bailout. The first one he said is, well, you know, I'm not ready to give up the Voting Rights Act. You know, the Voting Rights Act should still apply here. And that's true. It should apply here. It should apply everywhere. And in fact, the Voting Rights Act, even after a bailout, will continue to apply in Caroline County. The only thing that won't apply is the preclearance provisions. You won't have to go to DOJ every time to get federal approval from the federal government of a routine voting change. The Voting Rights Act has non-discrimination provisions that apply nationwide. Those provisions would continue to apply here in Caroline County. Second disadvantage is the minority community right now in Caroline County, anytime you do make a voting change, DOJ may contact them. Well, that won't happen anymore because there won't be a DOJ looking at each and every routine voting change. And by the way, the 20 voting changes you submitted in the last decade, DOJ approved every single one of those. There was no issue there about whether they were discriminatory in any way. They were approved fairly quickly by the Justice Department, sometimes not so quickly, but in any event, they were approved. What I've been able to do is use the bailout provisions to provide an opportunity to let the minority community get more engaged in the political process by including provisions in the bailout agreement that would contemplate more minority community participation. Does a bailout mean the Voting Rights Act will no longer apply? No. The Voting Rights Act will still apply. It still prohibits discrimination. So for anybody who's concerned that if we get a bailout, all bets are off and discrimination can run rampant, that's not true. The Voting Rights Act will still apply and it prohibits discrimination. The last line of this screen really also is an insurance policy. It says bailout can be revoked. If you get a bailout from the preclearance provisions and then you engage in racial discrimination in voting, you get brought back under the preclearance provisions if you do anything for the next 10 years. So you're kind of on probation, so to speak. And you know what happens when you violate your probation? You get locked up. Well, that's basically what Congress decided with the bailout provisions. Here's the way it works. You make a decision whether you want to start the bailout process. You allocate the funds to do so. I would estimate $4,500 probably from the very beginning of the process to the very end. Registrar gathers the information. We provide that information to the Justice Department. If the Justice Department agrees you're eligible, we file bailout papers in court. I filed bailout papers today in the D.C. Federal Court for Bedford County. I filed them on Friday for Bedford City in Virginia. 65 jurisdictions have bailed out since Congress amended the Voting Rights Act in 1982. I've represented every single one of these jurisdictions except for Namudno and Sandy Springs, Georgia. And the list is growing. I just mentioned the two Bedfords. And this is a chart that just shows you all the various jurisdictions and how they bailed out. The one I want to call your attention to is, whoops, let me go back to Essex County next door. Essex County is kind of the county that I would pick. It is similar to yours in a way. It had a couple of towns in it, but it also was 40% African American. And they decided that the time had come that they wanted to save some money and they wanted to bail out, and so they did. Now, I would say that in all these jurisdictions that have bailed out, one of the things that needs to be kept in mind, I said that you could be brought back under. You were on probation for 10 years. Of all the jurisdictions that have bailed out, nobody has ever been brought back under the preclearance provisions for discriminating on account of race. Once you were bailed out so far, and all you have to do, if somebody in the community were concerned after you bailed out and they said, hey, we think the county's discriminating in the way it does voter registration or its redistricting plan, they simply go to the write a letter to the Justice Department or pick up the phone and call the voting section of the Justice Department and say, hey, can you look into this? And they'll assign an attorney to investigate. I've often worried why local governments are not taking the advantage of it. I think a lot of people see it as too costly or too burdensome, and it's really neither of those things. In fact, as I said earlier, it can save you money and make it more convenient. The only other thing I'll say is I've devoted my whole life to enforcing the Voting Rights Act. I'm not here to try to let people who aren't eligible to bail out, to get them bailed out. If people aren't eligible to bail out, they shouldn't bail out, and that's what the Voting Rights Act is all about. I spent 40 years of my legal career, and I was a chief of the voting section, deputy chief in charge of all the voting rights litigation for the United States at the Justice Department. The Voting Rights Act is a sacred document to me. And as somebody said earlier, people died to get the Voting Rights Act enacted. But I will tell you, as a voting rights attorney and as a civil rights attorney, that if the Voting Rights Act is going to remain constitutional and remain the law of the land, then people should bail out. Because when we go back to the Supreme Court and we tell the Supreme Court that we want the Voting Rights Act to be upheld because that's constitutional, we have to show that bailout is an option and that people are taking advantage of it. And if we don't, then we will lose the valuable preclearance provisions that we have. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you tonight about bailout.
We would like for y'all to, the Board of Supervisors, to consider the bailout process. And if you decide that you would want to go on, then we would need to have a public hearing, and there's a couple steps to go through that, you know. After the public hearing, then